Joining me in studio right now, Texas State Senator Charles Perry. Welcome back.
Welcome to you guys, man. It's good to be back. It's good to be home, I'll tell you.
Well, at least for a little bit, right?
A little bit. Not surprised, but yeah, it's good to be home. I had a little bit of CPA work to do. I had to go to get certification on some things. So it's been a busy couple of weeks since we've been home, but any day home's better than a day in Austin.
Yeah, well, of course, the 85th legislative session wrapped up. You said you weren't surprised by the overtime session that we will have. Were you surprised by the number of issues that the governor brought up?
You know, I was a little shocked at the volume of them, I guess, but I'm not surprised with the content. Every one of those were important to the majority of Texans. I think you had some polling on early. I didn't catch the numbers, but every one of those issues, I think, from even a DR, a Democrat, Republican, there's a large part of those on that list that people want to see. In the Senate, for the most part, I think with the exception of 2 or 3 items, passed them out. So
yeah.
I'm not surprised that the governor got a few phone calls from political folks out there and wanted some of those issues heard again. And, by not having a sunset bill, you don't have an option not to come back. I know there's been speculation we do, but we really don't. Timing could, but when you have to come back, you might as well make it a full deal because you're going to be there a while. So
the special session begins on July 18th. When I had the governor on the show, I believe it was last week, the governor said, hey, lawmakers, he was talking about the House and the Senate, everyone's got 6 weeks to kind of prepare, get ready for this. Of course, a lot, you and many other lawmakers, you've got other jobs, you own other businesses, you've got stuff going on, you've got families. So, there are other things that you're doing, but are there things that you'll be doing leading up to that special session that deal with legislative issues? Absolutely.
And Lieutenant Governor's assigning bills, if you will, of that call. There were several on there, and each of us that are either in the committee environment that those bills will be heard in, or it just happens to be our niche, if you will, are getting those calls. He asked me last week about a specific item on the agenda and said, would you take it? I said, be welcome. It was a pro-life issue. I hate to get it too far out there because there's several of those, and until he's made those final assignments, it's hard to speak. But so we're getting those phone calls to get ready. It's one I'm familiar with, so won't be a lot of catching up to do on the substance. But those are calls. But as you said, I am literally trying to get my CPA practice in a fashion to go back. You come home, and a lot of people knew you were coming home. When you get home, they want you to get your stuff done. So we're getting our stuff done, and then taking just small breaks. I was in Chicago for a week to get recertified, and it was not a vacation, but my wife got to go and enjoy Chicago while I was in the hotel all day. So you just do little things like that along the way. But I was could see Dad yesterday, drive down there. So, but I've been in the district. I've been in Abilene, Roscoe, 2 or 3 events locally. So, it never stops when you have 51 counties. So yeah. I've got 1,000 miles on my truck about the last 7 or 8 days.
What are folks saying to you about the last session? Are they saying anything about the last session?
It's been interesting. I've had a meeting with my county judges, which I expected some hard questions to be asked and answered, and they were. And I think everybody understands where we're sitting. May not agree, but they understand why we do what we do, and I think that's important. Abilene, just a whole different discussion. It was a chamber crowd. And they just want to know about school and some other things that are going on, kind of what the bathroom bill was really about. I've had several inquiries as to why we're doing it, and once you explain it to them, they're like, oh, we get that now. So just different things to different people mean different things. Water has been subject matter of both, which I expect it to be. And that's kind of my job. That's kind of what we're supposed to do is think water, think big on water. Several of my water bills were attached to Representative Larson, and I've learned a couple of things this session. I knew it going in that you got to pick your reps, and I like Lyle. I think he's smart and good on water. We're going to Mexico, not New Mexico, but Mexico in August to visit with those guys in Mexico City. They owe us water. They can habitually get behind on the water they owe us. So that's a meeting I'm not looking forward to, but we've had 3 of them in the States, and it's time to go down there and talk about it. But sharp guy, good guy, just got on the wrong side of the fence. I tell people that membership has its privileges. And when you're statewide, you have agendas, and you try not to operate in a vacuum. If it's an important issue for your speaker or for your lieutenant governor or your governor, you try to get that done. And if you try not to cross them on some ways, but poor Lyle got caught up, I think. But as a sacrifice, I think 3 or 4 of my little bills on the water initiative got rolled up in that. So you never know. I have about 80 bills almost getting to the governor's desk, 75 to 80, one way or another, either be mine or author or sponsor or amendment, and those are all good things. So
very good. Before we get a break, I want to talk about, and you brought up the school districts that you were speaking with when it comes to the bathroom bill. Mm-hmm. And the governor, when he was talking about a special session, really didn't say we have to pass the Senate version or the House version. He just said a version of the bathroom bill. What do you anticipate if lawmakers get to it and vote it out? What do you think it's going to look like at the end of the day?
So real close, I think we really are. That's one of the issues I think we will see some results on. The House pitched a bill after we sent our Senate version over. Senate version was pretty broad, pretty encompassing, pretty severe. House came up with a version, I think, with minor tweaks to the House version. The Senate could agree. At the end of the day, it's to protect the school districts the right to accommodate. My school districts for years have held this issue high regards as far as accommodation goes. If a student's in that situation, they accommodated. They accommodated typically by providing private access. Separate but equal will not satisfy this agenda, this momentum, and this movement, if you will. So if you don't have a statewide bill to step in the gap and defend districts, as individual lawsuits will occur over this issue, for their right to accommodate, then they will be faced with defending the right to keep them out and segregated. In other words, a female 14-year-old and a male 14-year-old that happens to be questioned, whichever, they will want to see that mix or that sharing together. So this bill very simply gives the state an ability to step in on behalf of a district to protect the very thing they've been doing for years, which is the right of accommodation, which everybody agrees. That's the way you handle this. But the idea that you're going to put them together and unwind UIL and unwind Title IX funding and unwind, by virtue of lawsuit litigation, the school district's local budgets, this is what that bill's about, and I hope we get it done. And I think we're pretty close. I really think minor changes to the House version, which is significantly different than the Senate's, but gets to the same meat, I think we'll be there pretty fast.
When we come back, we'll continue our discussion with State Senator Charles Perry here on the Chad Hasty Show. Much more to get into, including the bill that keeps making headlines everywhere, property tax issues. We'll talk about that when we come back. In fact, a new Texas Tribune poll shows limiting property taxes has the support of 77% of their respondents. Pretty interesting. We'll be right back. Back on the Chad Hasty Show. News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO. Continuing our discussion with Texas State Senator Charles Perry joining me in studio. And let's talk a little bit about SB 2. This is something the governor has pushed for. He's brought it up, of course, for the special session. It was a big issue for the lieutenant governor, a big issue for the state Senate. Got to the House and was kicked around and everything sort of fizzled out. So overall, for those who don't know, what would SB 2 do if passed, and what would you like to see it do?
So in a nutshell, it's the beginning of the process of limiting growth of government. And it does it by virtue of allowing a voter to have a voice in what a local jurisdiction can charge, specifically 5%. So 5% was the rate back in the 80s. It changed to 8%. We're trying to bring the 8% rollback bound down to 5%. But currently, even at the 8%, if it goes over that, they make a taxpayer to come with a petition to petition the discussion about whether or not that is an acceptable rate increase. So let's carve out a couple of things. One, in a nutshell, it's to take away the petition requirement. A voter shouldn't have to jump through hurdles to have a discussion about taxing them. Most voters, if properly explained and educated on why you need the additional money, will vote for that. So at 5% plus growth, this doesn't even restrict growth. And to put that in context, some of our urban communities on east of I-35 are getting 8% plus growth, which throws their tax values going into a double-digit increase every year without voter approval. So SB 2 says we're going to give you 5% plus growth without question. I always tell people, how many employees can go to their employer and be guaranteed a 5% increase? And I don't think any of them to date have answered me affirmatively that they're guaranteed 5%. So we have allowed government a 5% plus growth in the Senate version without a petition requirement or a vote, if you will. So if it goes to 5.001, at that point, the voters would have a vote to ask why it's above 5%, and it's up to the jurisdiction at that point to justify that. So that's SB 2 in a nutshell. It's not a property tax relief, but it does begin the process of limiting growth in government where, I don't feel like there's a bunch of people out there just taking abuse of taxpayers, but I think taxpayers can always benefit by having an active voice. We gripe about apathy and voter apathy, and people are checked out because they feel like there's no way to engage. This just says they get to engage if you need more than 5%.
There are some who say that this is anti-rural, that this hurts the rural voters, rural communities, the rural lawmakers, and there was an article that came out in Texas Monthly that said that basically you and there are some other senators that y'all are ignoring the rural people. You ignore them, you don't listen to them, you don't care about them, that you're only listening to Dan Patrick.
Yeah, and I don't respect that opinion because it's based on nothing but hyperbole and somebody thinks they might want to run for an office that's got support of a local newspaper and media. But that said, the reality of the day is the rules are a little bit of a challenge. Those that have oil and gas interest and minerals interest district have such a volatile economy. The oil and gas revenues go up and down dramatically. So they are in a little bit of a different situation where 5% may not be enough because truthfully they have to rat hole. When their values are up, they put a little money back. When their values are down, then they tab those reserves. So when you do kind of make the voter engage in that, but those are very few exceptions. I think you'll see a House version come back from the Senate version with some carve-ins is kind of the last word, 20 of the biggest counties. That would accept out most of my rural communities that have an interest. Most of my rural people, if they're honest, will tell you that they'll never scratch 5%. I've told my folks in Austin that I hope my rural communities gripe about 5% because that means they would be growing. Mm-hmm. We have the opposite impact right now. So as a practical application, very few people see that 5%, even in Lubbock. Our county and our local guys in conversation will tell you they don't see us needing it because you get growth. But on those minerals that have the volatility, that is a challenge. It is a challenge because you may be at the top of the rollback rate before you ever start, and you didn't change a thing. You still have the one sheriff, the one road grader, and the one county commissioner. And some of my guys aren't even taking paychecks. So it's a challenge, and I would be okay with that because it's probably never going to affect them. But on those guys with huge variations, they need a little relief. And then to make uniform elections part of that discussion so that they're not having elections that cost them more money than the tax they get. 5% in a rural community might be $20,000 of tax revenue. 1 cent in Harris County is worth about $30 million, I'm told. So you can see the disparity in how much a penny makes in various communities. So you just got to be cognizant of that. We're a big state. We're diversified. You got to allow for that. So we'll see where it goes. As far as rural communities go, school vouchers, big discussion. I carved out 237 out of 254 districts. I don't know how much more rural intense I can get, whether that's the right policy or not. There's people that believe vouchers are good, but in my rural communities, they don't apply. So there's rural has always been and will continue to be a focus. I serve 51 counties, and if you look at the population base, it's almost 50-50. Mm-hmm. You take Lubbock, San Angelo, and Abilene, and then you add up all my others. I'm about a 400 range in population. So everything I do is couched around what is it going to do to rural, what is it going to do to urban. And people in Lubbock want property tax reform. I can promise you that. People in No Trees, Texas may not quite have that same sentiment. So it's a challenge with 51 and rural, but it is what it is.
And I think people around the state do. I mean, you look at this, Texas Tribune poll that, admittedly, it usually kind of leans to the left as far as results go. And even they're saying 77% support, a property tax reform. And to me, I think you brought it up earlier, there's not as much maybe savings in this, but it's getting that spotlight and turning the spotlight on government, which I think is a good thing. And I guess that the lawmakers who are against this, and I'm talking on the local level, Are they against it because they don't want to be held accountable in some of these areas?
Well, there's a principle, let locals do locals. But here's the thing. If I cap you without voter approval, basically, then you're going to have to look at that budget every year, and you're going to have to go down and say roads, public safety, bridges, public safety. I mean, our role on government, we need to remember what our core is, and the state gets out of its box sometimes. But I think if you've got that cap out there without voter approval, then you go to voters for more money, and you're not spending it on roads, public safety, and those things that are local jurisdiction, water, infrastructure, some of your utilities, those things. If you're not spending money on that, voters are going to probably start asking tough questions. And there's nothing that we spend money on that we probably don't all agree is a great thing in a quality of life, but we spend money on things that are definitely not attached to those core services. So I think that's probably where there's a rub is we like the flexibility of spending money on things that probably at the end of the day may not be associated with. What is economic development at local levels? You get that debate going. Is it parks? Is it dog parks? Is it all those things that, well, they're all neat things, but it's really not core functions. And so you get those discussions going when you cap growth without a voter approval.
Where do you come down on this issue? And it's going to be brought up again, I think, in the special session of local control. You have some of the cities, and we even had some city council members who said, "What are we just supposed to sit here and look like figureheads?" The city council members. Some city council members will say the state's imposing, and they complain about Washington D.C. imposing on Texas, but they're imposing on us. So does that argument hold water?
It does on some level when the state gets out of control, and I'm cognizant of it. We try not to do it, but here's what's going on in the state right now. Every jurisdiction just about that's of any size is making ordinances that are inconsistent with business environment. They're making ordinances that are inconsistent with people's local liberty, so to speak, is what the word I hear now. So liberty's individual, has nothing to do with the jurisdiction. But when you infringe on those people, the state, i.e. sanctuary cities, you don't want your jurisdictions subject to the political or the will of an individual law enforcement officer in those jurisdictions to be the determining factor of how and what laws are applied. You create chaos. So when you have an event, i.e. fracking last session, you had a ordinance coming into play which would catch fire, and it's the momentum, and it's the moving through the TMLs and all those advocates that do those things, and the environmentalists and things get behind these. And this is where they're attacking. They couldn't win it at the top down. They're going from the bottom up. So bottom line is state has a role. And number one, we create cities. We create home rule cities. We created all the statutes for that. We created the rollback rate. So we're not out of our box. But at the end of the day, when local ordinances are beginning to get out of their box and they're actually having an impact on statewide policy, then we have to. And that's what people call our offices when these property tax notices go out. They don't call those other guys. They call our offices. Right. So it's our role, it's our deal. But when you look at a fracking ban, you can't let that stand.
Yeah. Can you hang out for one more segment? Okay. When we come back, we'll wrap up our discussion with Texas State Senator Charles Perry here on the Chad Hasty Show. Back on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. We're back with one more segment with Texas State Senator Charles Perry here on the Chad Hasty Show. And Senator Perry wanted to get into at least two more things, and one of them being the Texas Tech vet school. That's a big win for Texas Tech, a big win for this area, and a big win up with our friends up north.
It's huge. Great session for Tech. You'd think not with all the budget shortfall discussions, but Tech came out with the land title transferred so that they can move forward on a veterans clinic that they'd been awarded from the feds. So that is now in place where they can move forward. The vet school, obviously, huge, and then the dental school in El Paso. Mm-hmm. When we went in, we were hoping for the vet school for sure. We thought the dental school, because it already had quite a bit of money and support behind it, might be a viable option, but still didn't know. So the vet school was an interesting dynamic. A lot of people came together and got that thing done. To Strauss' credit and the House members over there, Smithy, Frullo, Burrows, all those, Forprice, all those guys were because it made sense. It was a great policy. We need a large animal vet school to produce the volume of vets that we need to keep our dairy and our cattle industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. In hearings that I'd had In the interim and prior session and that session, we had a big hearing early in the session with A&M, and they basically admitted they had not feel that need. So that was momentum building. But to be truthful, it wouldn't have happened had the House not started it. Senate didn't have it. Yeah. Senate put it in. Senate put it in because Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Senator Finance Chair Jay Nelson, and then multiple support from my other senators after the hearing from A&M, we got it back in there. It was about 4 weeks out before the budget was voted on. It wasn't in there until that day. I had asked Governor Patrick, I went to him and said, these are some priorities of the district. These are important for the state. This is a statewide initiative and policy, and I really need that in there. And he had a list of some number that he gave priorities for, and I ended up being number 10 on the list, I was told. Finance chair came by and said, this is an important issue for the state and you and our district. I said, yeah. And I said, it's an economic development engine, but more importantly, it's a need. This policy needs to happen. We're not meeting the need. Our kids are leaving the state, spending money out of the state for something that Texas ought to own, cattle. I mean, Come on, with others and other stuff. But so honestly, hadn't been for support of both the House and the Senate and the colleagues, and then the governor signed it. And there was a tremendous amount of political pressure not to do that. Yeah. So to his credit, but I think it goes back to the strength of the need. But it was not in our budget till 4 weeks out. And I asked Governor Patrick that should be a strong consideration for rural Texas, but it's a need that needs to be met. And his support. And then you got Lois Colcourse, Conferee, sat next to. She was battling the other chancellor of the state of Texas over on the AM side, putting political pressure to try to kill it in conference. But it stood the test time. It was strategy. I think it worked out perfect. We kept a low profile. We didn't make it alumni-centered. We made it policy-driven, which is where those issues need to be resolved, is in the legislature. And came through. Big deal for tech. That's a groundbreaker. Yeah. And more importantly, though, and I keep going, I don't just do things because. This is a need that we have in this state because our food supply, people would probably run and hide if they knew how deficient we are on keeping up with all the things that affect our food supply, and cattle, and that industry is a huge part of that. And dairy's huge out here. Just go ask Littlefield. They're getting a $300 million milk plant facility, powdered milk plant from the dairy industry in this region. So big deal, huge deal. Been on the drawing books for 30 years probably. Yeah. Just to be a part of that, pulling it across the line was huge. Yeah,
that was great for this area and for Texas Tech. Obviously, sanctuary cities. Your bill passed that made statewide headlines. Besides that bill, sanctuary cities, and if you want to give any comment on what the final product looked like, feel free to do so. But was there another bill that to you? You were happy to see it pass, something that you were working on or others were working on that maybe didn't grab those headlines the way that sanctuary cities and the Texas Tech Vet School did?
It's fun to ask that question, and people think sanctuary cities was, and it's a national bill. It'll end up in feds, some of those language. But really, looking back, the CPS reforms that we did, I had a role in those. I authored the telepharmacy bill for rural communities to have farm techs with a pharmacist Skyping in so that those drugs can be dispensed. Telemedicine, big part. Telepsychiatry, which is a pilot project that's been ongoing for our counties to have a psychiatrist available to do intakes at our county jails. Those are all big ones that I was part of. Dram shop. Most people don't know TABC can hold a bar owner liable if they're overserved. And that bar and that bartender. I moved that to synthetic marijuana. We've had a big issue in Lubbock. I've worked on it 3 sessions. This is one of the final tools that I'm aware of. Now that person at the smoke shop that owns it can be liable personally for that if they serve those synthetic marijuana patches. Just on and on. But I think if I had to, and I've told this to several, there was an amendment I put on the CPS reform bill that grants a foster to adopt parent access to medical history of the child they're looking at adopting before they adopt, because parents are adopting kids that are addicted that they don't know until after adoption, and that's a little late. Not that they wouldn't make that change decision, but when those kids start having symptoms and issues, if they don't have that medical history, they don't know where to go for treatment or start that. So huge bill for me. Lots of ag-related issues. We've got expansion of ability, capacity to carry the milk, so to speak. We got that deal done. Ag lien bill got tweaked. That's something Representative Burrows and I had done last session, so we tweaked it again this session. But just one after another, I have about 80 bills getting over to the governor's office, either through amendment or my bill. And then pro-life bill. This is a ground shaker. This is a game changer. Outlawed dismemberment abortions to the sense that the dismemberment itself can't be the cause of the baby's death. You've got to actually stop the heart of the baby before you dismember it. Prior to this law, we would literally kill the baby by virtue of dismembering the limbs and have it bleed to death. So huge step in that right direction. It's, the more we talk about that issue, the more public awareness builds on our side, because we're just better at that than as a society. So a whole host. I couldn't go through all 80, but San Angelo Supported Living Centers in my district, they're a forensic living center now, a designation that keeps them protected from some state supported living centers closures that we anticipate probably having some next decisions made next session. Locally, we got the Lubbock hot tax for hotel development. We got the I-27 study out of the Senate, but it died over in the House. There was 2 or 3 just local things that we got done. Now, it was a my most productive session, but my most difficult session. And
I'm hearing that from a lot of people. It was just a difficult session.
It was hard. Everything was hard. So, but some school reforms and some things that went through. But there, I could go through that whole host of 80 bills. But a lot of good stuff, a lot of rule stuff, a lot of carve outs. Bills. Let's do a website and require all jurisdictions, taxing jurisdictions, to have a website. That doesn't make sense when there's one person in the office.
Right.
Criminal justice reform, Tim Cole bill. We've got the exoneration reforms where basically if you've been wrongly accused and incarcerated, that there's some protections now to hopefully prevent that from happening. Smitty sent that over from the House. I picked it up on the Senate. I have a criminal justice advisory council I sit on down there now, and we're having our first meeting after the session here to look back at what things we did. So busy, productive. Still got some work to do, obviously, on the 18th, but all in all, it was a good session for Texas. The budget was tight.
Good to visit with you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
When we come back, we'll wrap up today's program. Thanks again to Texas State Senator Charles Perry. Good session, and they've got overtime coming up in July.
Thanks, Chad.